So last day, we're gonna go through, power through the last part of the contract, and then we'll go through some of the addendums. And I asked Chad to print out a couple of special addendums that other companies use. So if he brings it in, we can kind of go through it real quick. If he doesn't, then just know that other special addendums that other companies have may vary from ours. So you have to be aware of that.
This addendum in this packet, that's all of that can be found on the KW internet. And everybody that has an MLS account with the office, or I'm sorry, a zip forms account with the office, there are other forms that are in there that are not in here because they're available online, but these forms do come into play every now and then. But
Can I have one, Tony?
because they're not used all the time. We didn't want to spend the money to upload a bunch of forms, because every time there's a revision, we always have to update it. And put new stuff in these forms.
Okay.
And so a lot of times I'll see contracts come in. And someone tries to create like an addendum in special terms, and I just kick it back and say, hey, there's an addendum for that. So on the KW internet, you can find all of this stuff in there. And if you find a really good, addenda that another company uses, like, bring it to our attention and we'll cockroach it, as they say.
So I like living on the edge. Let's start this way this time.
Where do we leave off at?
O2.
O2.
Joanne, you can start. O2.
Termination within contingency time period. Should this purchase contract specifically designate that this paragraph to govern the termination process for any term of this purchase contract. Any party given the right to terminate this purchase contract pursuant to such term and who elects to do so must deliver to the other party a written notice of termination prior to the expiration of the time period where the date specified in such term. If the party is given the right to terminate, fails to deliver the written notice to the other party within such time period or by such date, the termination right shall be deemed to be waived and can no longer be used by the party as the reason to terminate this purchase contract. If the terminating party so terminates this purchase contract, buyer and seller shall promptly execute all cancellation documents requested by escrow, and escrow shall, unless otherwise agreed to in this purchase contract, return to buyer all deposits previously made, less the amount of any escrow expenses or fees chargeable to buyer. Thereafter, neither buyer nor seller shall have any further rights or obligations under this purchase.
Okay, you guys all understand how that works, right? So like J1 is an example. If J1 ends on day 10, and you as the buyer's agent don't terminate based on J1 being unacceptable to buyer without written notice, after the 10th day, buyer accepts. So that's, we talked about when you get into escrow, trying to line up all your resources, such as a home inspector. Not only having the home inspector going early enough, but also giving yourself time, you and the buyer time, as well as the seller and the seller's agent time to negotiate anything that you might want to negotiate before J1 expires. Okay, it is possible you can go to the seller's agent and say, sorry, we need more time. But it's up to them to accept that or not. So if they accept a longer duration for J1, then make sure you have that in writing. The bottom line is, if you don't act to cancel before the end of J1, in this case, that's for O2, right? It applies to J1, then you accept it.
And make sure if you're asking the seller's agent for an extension and they say, okay, make sure there's something in writing from the seller. And, if you go back to
It should be an amendment, right?
Yeah, should be an amendment.
It shouldn't just be an email. It should be an amendment that the seller signs. Seller has to sign that thing.
So if you take a look at J1, if you want to go back in the contract, it says right at the bottom. If buyer fails to make an election in writing to terminate this purchase contract within the specified time period, then buyer will have waived this contingency. Now I know that you have which one do you have in there? You have Better Homes and Garden?
Yep.
Let me see Better Homes.
There's two, right? I don't know which one he, okay, here's two.
Again, I'll go through the Better Homes and Garden one next time. But they used to have a provision in there that says that because if Kent's representing the seller and I represent the buyer and I say, hey, Kent, we want a $5,000 credit, and Ken never gets back to me, I blew past the deadline for the buyer. So Better Homes had in their addendum that states that if we make a written request to the seller for a credit for concessions, that the contingency is automatically extended until the seller sends in a termination letter. Now, it used to be in one of the previous editions. I'm not sure about this one, but I'll try and verify that a little bit later.
As a buyer's agent, so this would be something that you'd really have to think about carefully before you use it. But I've done it in the past where we've got into escrow, we went through J1 and discovered more things than buyer anticipated. And I think we may have had 2 days left of J1 timeframe. And agent is saying, the buyers don't respond right away. So with 2 days left, I was a little worried that we would pass J1 without any feedback from the sellers. So kind of playing with fire on this one a little bit, because what I told buyers, I said, look, if we don't issue notice of cancellation prior to expiration, then we accept. And it's not that we can't get out from another provision, but if you know that this isn't, unless you get something you're going to cancel, then what I would suggest we do is put into our request. We put in a $50,000 request, and it said that if we cannot come to agreement by the end of J1, buyer automatically cancels. So that was already in our request, which gave it a lot more meat. So then the agent called me back and said, how do we work this thing out? So originally they had positioned, we're not going to do anything. We already came down lower than we wanted to come down. But then obviously, right, they want to make something happen. And so when we submitted it that way, it opened up that line of communication, and we're actually able to get what we wanted before the end of J1. So there are ways around it that you can kind of position such that it doesn't put as much pressure on that deadline. But understand that if the seller can get pissed, right, and say, okay, fine, walk away, then as long as your buyer's okay with that, then you're good. If they're not okay with that, maybe don't take such a extreme measure, and just make sure that you give yourself enough time to negotiate through J1. Okay. Hiroko, you want to do all three?
Okay, termination after specified contingency condition time period. Should the contract specifically designate this paragraph to cover the termination process for any term of the purchase contract? Any party given the right to terminate this purchase contract within to such term and who elect to do so must deliver the other party a written notice of termination within X amount of days, 7 days left, if left length of the expiration of the time period or the date specified in such term. Is a party given the right to terminate fails to deliver the written notice to the other party within the time period specified in this paragraph, the termination right shall be deemed to be waived as to the party, and can no longer be used by the party as a reason to terminate the purchase contract. If the terminating party to terminate this purchase contract, buyer and seller shall promptly execute all cancellation documents requested by escrow, and escrow shall, unless otherwise agreed to in this purchase contract, return to buyer or deposit previously made, less the amount of any escrow expenses or fee chargeable to buyer. Thereafter, neither buyer nor seller shall have any further rights or obligations under this purchase contract.
Okay. So 03, I don't know if you noticed, but 03 and 02, both provisions allow the buyer to get their deposits back. 01, if buyer's in default, seller can keep the deposits, right? So 01 is pretty bad. 02 and 03, just within or X amount of days after the deadline of that provision would it apply that you can still cancel. And as Tony mentioned the last time, right, go through the contract and highlight all the O's. Right, you won't see too many ones. You see a lot of twos, a lot of threes.
And with regards to 03, sorry, I was on a different page. For me, I don't like 7 days. I like short time frames
For 03.
for 03. I like 3 days. Because I feel if I'm representing the seller, I don't want to give the buyer any more time than what they've already had. And if I represent the buyer, I want to give them a little bit of adequate time to finish out a contingency without getting canceled on. But
So-
there's a provision in H. The reason why I say is because H3B, if the buyer's met all conditions of the loan commitment letter, but lender fails to fund prior to closing, then the buyer may elect to terminate this purchase contract pursuant to 03. So if I represent the seller and we let them have 7 days, that means that they've got another 7 days to get funding, and my sellers have maybe already moved. We don't know if they're going to get funding. We don't know if we're going to be able to have to go back on the market. So I want the sellers to know immediately or as soon as possible as to what the outcome is going to be.
Okay, Jess.
Oh, for mediation. If any dispute or claim arises out of this purchase contract prior to between buyer and seller, or between buyer and or seller and a brokerage firm and all licensees assisting in the transaction, and the parties to such dispute or claim are unable to resolve the dispute, buyer and seller agree in good faith to attempt to settle such dispute or claim by non-binding mediation. The paragraph shall not apply to any complaint of unethical conduct against the brokerage firm and all its licensees who are obliged to comply with the code of ethics of the National Business. Such complaint against the brokerage firms and or its licensee assisting in this transaction must be brought before the local court of realtors of which the brokerage firm and all its licensees are members.
So Tony, you have a lot of experience there with 04, 05.
I do. Not personal experience,
As the
like,
pick, as the
yeah,
PP.
of having to go at
So
the
you can
board.
make your comments on
Uh,
04 and 05.
Try and work out your differences. The best that you can. And a lot of times, like, I give you an example. I called a friend of mine who's a realtor with, she has her own company. And was thinking about filing an ethics complaint against a bigger brokerage company than the agent. So she represents the buyers. They write up a purchase contract. And they put range hood in the purchase contract because that's what was stated in MLS. They go do the inspection, there's no range hood. So the seller's agent goes, oh, it was a mistake. We can just do an amendment. And my friend is like, yeah, but it was in MLS, so we deserve to have it. She goes, no, but we can do an amendment. That's what my broker said. So my friend goes to had worked for the broker before. She says, oh yeah, we can just, we'll just do an amendment to the contract. And so she's arguing with her. And so she's asking me about, can I file an ethics complaint? I said, yeah, you can. The problem is, it's gonna cost you like $250 or $500 to file it. Then you have to gather all of this information and you have to go in front of a board. Like, do you want to go through that? But if it's a big issue and you really feel that you and your clients have been wrong, by all means, file a complaint. And basically you pay the fee and it's kind of like going to court. You have to present your case, they have to defend it. And
Who's involved in the mediation process? Is it realtors or is it
yeah.
realtors? So your
It's three,
peers?
yeah, it's three realtors, and that's what they do. And I gotta tell you, I give those guys a lot of credit that sit on the board or on the committee, because they dive through all the documentation. And I've been involved in some cases where, stacks of folders are this big.
Wow.
So, and they really try and get everybody to come to an agreement. And sometimes you can't, and then, you go to arbitration, and then
So arbitration is when lawyers are involved, or?
You can ask to arbitrate it with the board. I don't think they like to do it.
So mediation, you don't have to accept.
Right,
Arbitration, you have to accept the outcome.
yeah.
And arbitration doesn't have to involve.
So you can be there all day long and the other side says, no, that's it, and I want you to mediate. And if you have a good case, by all means, just sit there all day long and say, no, I'm not, I'm gonna win this thing, just really hold out.
And hopefully you never have to go through that. I've not had to go through that, but from what I hear, it's.
And usually it's like the biggest one is commissions, like people, go for arbitration mediation because of commissions. And so when you're sitting in front of, three of your peers and you don't want to pay some referral fee that you signed an referral fee agreement for, they're going to rule against you. But at the same token, if somebody's trying to claim commissions or procuring cores or something like that, you're probably going to lose on the other side if you don't have any documentation.
Okay, who's next?
Commissioner?
Yep.
If any dispute or claim arises out of this purchase contract during this transaction or at any time after closing between buyer and seller, or between buyer and or seller and the brokerage firm and all its licensees assisting in the transaction. And if such dispute cannot be resolved through mediation, then the parties are encouraged to consider arbitration as an alternative to litigation. It is recommended that the parties seek legal counsel to make this determination.
Sunshine, can you do 06 as well?
Third party claims. It is understood that if a dispute or claim is made by or against a third party who is not obligated or willing to mediate or arbitrate such dispute or claim, then buyer and seller shall not be required to mediate or arbitrate such dispute.
I don't know what that means.
I want to go back to arbitration right away. So arbitration, mediation. If you're a licensee and you're dealing with another licensee, you can't go file suit against them. By signing the code of ethics, becoming a member of the board, NAR, HAR, HBR, you've already agreed to mediate any of your any of your differences. And the only time that you as an agent or brokerage company is going to have to mediate is if you get sued, if you're a defendant, or if your clients are a plaintiff, they'll sue the brokerage companies as well. And that's the only time you really have to mediate or arbitrate.
Arbitrate, okay.
Well, you can still mediate, right? Buyer and seller, somebody wants money.
Yeah.
They want money from everybody.
Okay.
So.
Okay, what's 07?
Shares of law and form. The property is located in the state of Hawaii. The purchase contract shall be borrowed by and construed according to the laws of the state of Hawaii. All legal actions or proceedings concerning this purchase contract and or the following shall be filed and conducted in the appropriate state of the federal court located in the state of Hawaii. Termination, arbitration, and or litigation in the state court shall be filed and conducted in the county where the property is located.
Can you do 08 as well?
Attorney's fees. In the event of default by party and or legal action or arbitration, including a claim by brokerage, firm or commission, the prevailing party shall be entitled to recover all costs incurred, including reasonable attorney's fees.
Okay. Any questions on section O, I guess? No,
I don't think we need to go, have anybody read P1, P2, P3, but does everybody know what HARPTA and FRPTA are? Do you know, like, if you're representing the buyer and the seller doesn't provide either document, that your buyer is gonna be responsible for the taxes? So that's why it's really important that at escrow, that the sellers, you check to make sure the sellers have signed off on HARPTA as well as FRPTA. And if you're representing a buyer in a or if you're representing a seller in a transaction, with regards to HARPTA anyway, and FRPTA, is that instead of having there are several different forms. One is they just take the lump sum right off the top. So if it's $1 million, they're taking 15%, and I think it's 8.5% or 8.25%. 15% for the federal and 8.25%, I believe, for the state. That's right off the top. It's not like what their proceeds are, just like right off the top. And then they have to file a tax return in the tax year to get the money back. Okay. But you can file a form, and it's usually done with a CPA, that they'll calculate the taxes that are all owed. And if it's approved by the state as well as the Fed, when it comes time for closing, they'll just take the amount of taxes that are due.
And that's HARPTA, right?
HARPTA as well as FRPTA.
so everyone understand that this is to make sure that the seller, if they're not a state resident or a US citizen, will pay their fair share of taxes. That's what this is all about. And the only way they can make sure that it happens is by having somebody on the hook, and it's the buyer. So it says that you need to make sure that the seller is paying their taxes, and they need to disclose, right? There's a form that they sign that says who they are, if they're a Hawaii resident or not. And if for some reason they're not, and they don't pay their taxes, in the contract, it says that they go back to the buyer to
Yeah.
settle it.
Like, you know, like sometimes like military people that only here for a couple of years, they won't claim Hawaii as their residency. It'll be wherever they're from. So they have to, so they're not subject to the withholding tax, but they do have to file forms with the state to be approved, you know, before closing.
So both of those affect the seller.
Both those. Well, the seller has to, in this case, with regards to like someone that's a resident of Washington in the military here for 2 years, right? And they buy and they sell a property.
Seller.
Foreign sellers, it is both FRPTA and HARPTA. If you're not a foreigner, it's just the HARPTA.
And it's a withholding,
Yeah,
right? So it's not that the government will keep it all, they'll keep an amount that hopefully in their eyes is more than what the seller would owe, based on whatever is taxable. And then they get reimbursed the difference.
and they will keep it if the client doesn't file a tax return.
Yeah.
And if you're dealing with someone that has a trust, if the seller is a trust, the trust has a separate either EIN number, FEIN number, or social security number.
Mhm.
So when you're applying for the withholding, you have to make sure that it's the EIN, FEIN, or the social security number of the trust. You know, like if it's Anthony Pace and I'm selling something, that's social security number. If it's Anthony Pace Trust, that has a different tax identification number.
Good question. I'm trying to remember, do military, if they don't claim Hawaii as their residence, do they get the homeowners exemption or not?
You mean homeowner's exemption for
If
like
they buy a home?
Property tax?
property taxes? Good question. That I don't know.
Because I know like, you know, if you're.
Are they paying state tax? Actually, we can't answer that, so no sense we try and figure it out, because we're gonna be wrong probably.
That's a really big question. though.
Well, because they get, for example, they get the benefits, for a license plate. Pay like as if you were.
I think that's for only like VA, so, well, I think you have to be either 90 or 100% to be able to do that.
Well, you can be a non-resident of the state and still be an owner occupant.
Right.
So property tax is based on occupancy, not whether or not you're an investor.
So it's your primary residence.
If your primary residence, you should be able to get the deduction.
Right.
So if you claim that, then you get that with. Or you get.
So the home, I like the home exemption, you have to also be. A resident, I mean.
Well, you know, if you take a look in the contract under, you know, how the person's taking title, it asks you, are you gonna be an owner occupant? No, it says, doesn't say, right, are you gonna be an owner occupant or are you gonna be an investor? If you're an owner occupant, then you're entitled to, you know, reduce property taxes, which is different than, you know, because income tax is state, property taxes is county.
What if they move out of state? Like they lived here, they have residency here, the seller, then they move to a different state, change their residency.
And they keep the property, yeah, then you lose that status.
So I think you have to apply every year, and as long as you're living there and claim it as your primary residence, then you can do that, but if, yeah, switch it. And it's not your primary residence anymore, and you don't, then you apply and they don't get taxes for. I think you have to apply.
That's why there's like an exemption form that comes out, like if you're representing a buyer and he's purchasing a property that's an investment property. They're gonna have to file to claim the exemption. And I think it has to be in by September 31st. Otherwise, the tax status is still investor, so they end up paying higher property taxes. And it's not retroactive.
Sorry, you said it has to be reapplied every year. I think so. That's how they. Yeah. Probably when you're set.
Well, if you have a loan, the lender pays your property tax. Right, that's normally included in the. So anyway, we're getting a little off track here, but yeah,
We have tax laws.
yeah, that's next. Hey Kyle, good timing, you're next. R1.
Scope of services and disclaimer by brokerage firms. Brokerage firms assisting in this transaction, including their owners, licensees, consultants, and agents and employees. Strongly recommend that buyer and seller each consult their own attorney, estate planner, accountant, appraiser, architect, pest control expert, home inspector, insurance advisor, contractor, land surveyor, electrical engineer, civil engineer, structural engineer, soil engineer, land use professional, zoning expert, environmental expert, designer, title insurer, other professionals, and or subject matter experts, should they have any questions within those fields about this transaction. Buyer and seller understand that brokerage firms have not made any representations or warranties and have not rendered there any options about A, the legal or tax consequences of this transaction, B, the legality,
Yeah, legality.
correctness, status, existence, or any lack of any building permits which may have been required for the property. C, the land area of the property, the location of the boundaries, or the size of any improvements of the property. Or D, any of the matters set forth in paragraph I-6, general disclosure. Buyer and seller understand and acknowledge the parties are not relying upon brokerage firms for any of the foregoing services or advice.
So I was wrong. Earlier, I was telling you guys read R6, it's actually R1. But this clearly tells you what you're not, right? So it's dangerous when you start to provide all kinds of opinions on things outside of your scope or outside of your area of expertise. And so it says it right here. If a buyer or a client starts to ask too many of those types of questions, you got to refer back to this section and say, I'm sorry, that's not my area of expertise. You do have the right to go and get somebody who is a professional in that area for their services. Just to avoid, going back to section O, getting called in for mediation because you gave them the wrong advice. So just understand your lane on this contract.
And and then when you're in mediation against one of your clients, they're no longer your friend. Right?
Any questions on that? That's a big one. Okay, or two,
Yeah, rental property. Buyer understands that seller and brokerage firms are not offering to sell or selling the property together with any existing or future rental pool or other rental arrangement. Seller and the brokerage firms make no representations or guarantees about future rents. Buyer understands that should buyer rent the property after closing, buyer is assuming all risks relative to all of the foregoing. This sale includes real property only, and the intent is not to convey a security or investment security as defined by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission or other governmental agencies.
that's a good one. So if I have and critique this is the wrong advice, but if I have a investor client and they're looking for the right mix of down payment and cash flow, then what I try to avoid is telling them what I think the rental market is for that particular property. What I recommend they do is find the property manager and have the property manager engaged early in the process, so that when we show properties and the client takes a liking to one of them, that arrangement already exists, that relationship, so we can kick it over to the property manager. He can do his own thing and then come back to the client saying, yeah, this is what I would anticipate in terms of rental income. Because I tell the investor, at the end of the day, after it closes, unless you're going to do it yourself, you're going to need somebody to rent it for you. And if you hire somebody after the fact, they may say, well, I know you want 2,000, but I can only get 1,500 for it. And then you're kind of stuck then, right? So I would try to engage with a good property manager, maybe have somebody that you have a good relationship with, and then use that as one option for any investor client that you want to work with. How do you handle that?
Normally I'll take a look at it, and because I check. Let me know what the hot sheet is. Like an MLS, like you find out all the activity within the last 24 hours. You start taking a look at price changes, and the majority of price changes that you see are always rentals. So
Investment properties or rental properties?
rental properties.
Okay.
Right. So you can say, okay, rent, because they'll have a code that says R. So you can see if prices are coming down, 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 or they're going up. So for me, because I'm really engaged in the market and I like data, I would say to somebody, gee, I think the rents in this property may be a little bit too low, but confirm with a property manager and get a market analysis done. Just the opposite. I think the rents are really high. And if this guy moves out, you may have a hard time getting this amount of money. Same thing, engaging a property manager. Especially if
MLS has rentals, but it's not that robust, right?
there's a lot,
There's quite a bit.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. Yeah, there's a lot in there.
Okay.
Or you have somebody's like, hey, I'm thinking about, buying investment property in like Koula, Ward, and you got 50 new units have just closed and 40 of them are coming on the market for rent. Like, talk about competition, So it's really good to, like when you have a client, do a very in-depth analysis on everything. What the sales prices are. If it's an investor, hey, these are, you got 45 properties on the market for rent. Chances of you competing and everybody getting $4,500 a month, it's not going to happen, because people will start like, hey, I need to rent out my unit, because there's a cost to everything, right? And the same thing if you're engaging in something that it's like a short-term rental. Go get 2 years of history, so that buyers can make an informed decision.
Okay. Any questions on that? No. Okay, who wants to go next? Roland?
Future resale value. Seller and brokerage firms make no representations or guarantees about future resale values.
Yeah, maybe go up to 6.
Okay. Brokerage firms shall not be held liable to either buyer or seller for the failure of either buyer or seller to perform their obligations under the purchase contract. Permissions. The parties grant brokerage firms permission to supply data to the multiple listing service regarding the sales price, terms, and listing status of this transaction for use by other brokers and real estate professionals in making market studies, providing service to the public, and advising their clients. Disclosure of real estate licensing status. Hawaii law provides that the licensee shall not acquire, rent, lease, sell, or exchange an interest in or buy, rent, lease, sell, or exchange for oneself. Any member of the licensee's immediate family or brokerage firm, or any entity in which the licensee has any ownership interest. Properly listed with the licensee brokerage firm, or listed with any other brokerage firm or licensee without making the true position known in writing.
So this is when you represent a family member for R6. Yeah. So you have to disclose related to.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So is it like if it's my son's girlfriend, I don't have to disclose that, do I?
None unless they're married.
But if my son's wife,
Yeah,
disclose that, right?
really related to the buyer.
Yeah.
And then I always ask, like, if I'm representing a client and I know they're not a licensed broker, and it'll say disclosure. The licensing in this transaction is disclosed to fire. I'll say buyer does not hold a active real estate license, seller to disclose. Or I'll say seller does not does hold an active real estate license, buyer to disclose, because you want to know what the other party. You want to know everything about the other party. And it puts the agent on notice, like, okay, well, I need to disclose if I'm related to my buyer.
So you automatically put like.
I do it automatically. It's just something I got into decades ago, and I've never deviated from it.
So you say your buyers,
I just say my buyers does not hold an active real estate, and I always put seller to disclose, because if they don't disclose, it's right there. I asked you for it.
like seller to disclose question mark or period.
So I just say seller to disclose. Yeah.
What's considered a union family? Who is considered?
Good question. Yeah. There's no harm in disclosing everything.
Cousins.
Yeah. Or just say I'm related.
Okay.
Is related to the buyer. It doesn't,
Okay.
could be a, 10th cousin. Still related. Because if there's a reason for one party to file suit, don't give him any additional ammunition, like, oh, you didn't disclose that this is your 10th cousin. What else are you hiding from us? That's what the attorneys do.
Yeah, why don't you do, Chris, S1, S2?
One acceptance date as used in this purchase contract, the term acceptance date means the date on which the purchase contract becomes binding upon the parties.
So positive, so that's when, if you're submitting an offer, that would be the date that the other party signs off and accepts, right? That'll be the acceptance date.
Acceptance date, yeah.
Dates and times, as used in this purchase contract, the term day means calendar day unless otherwise specified in writing, and all dates and times are based on Hawaii Standard Time. For purposes of counting days within this purchase contract, day 1 commences the day after the event. For example, if the event is acceptance date on May 1st, day 1 is May 2nd, and 10 days after acceptance date is May 11th. Unless otherwise specified in writing, in this purchase contract, contingencies and all other dates in this purchase contract shall expire at 11:59 p.m. HST on the date stated.
Yeah, so if you send over the seller's disclosure statement on 11:59, then day 1 starts the next day. But if it's at midnight, day 1 starts the following day. Right?
And then when you, when you get acceptance, anytime you're dating something and it calls for a time, especially if you're representing, if your clients are gonna accept the counter offer, make sure it's timed, time stamped. You wanna know what time did they accept it?
You mean when you get it back or?
Like, if I'm representing you and you're
Mhm.
accepting an offer,
Mhm.
it says the date and the time, make sure it's time stamped.
That you write it in?
That you write it in, or like DocuSign,
DocuSign will
DocuSign, I
automatically do
put
that.
time, I make sure that every initial is timed, every signature has a timestamp on it. That way there's no questions.
Is that a selection that you have to choose
Yeah.
timestamp on docu?
I think so.
Cause I
Yeah.
see date, I never see,
Well, if
Time.
you can do like date and you can do date, you have to set it up so that the
Yeah,
date
yeah.
automatically displays the time as well.
okay,
Right, but it won't show it up as like a little label that you drag over.
okay.
It'll just say
Gotcha.
date, but it'll timestamp
It'll
it as well.
timestamp it as well, okay, cool, good to know. I never used that feature.
Does it matter, like when I'm doing that, if they're on a different, in a different time zone?
Everything's Hawaii based. You're welcome.
Time of essence. Except as otherwise provided in the purchase contract, time of essence and the performance by all parties of the respective obligations under this purchase contract. This includes compliance with all contingencies and other time periods stated in the purchase contract.
You're gonna read off for it, yeah?
Yeah, fair housing. Seller and buyer agreed to comply with all federal and state fair housing and anti-discrimination laws that prohibit discrimination based upon buyer's race, color, national origin,
was added.
ancestry, religion, sex, including gender identity or expression, sexual orientation, handicap, disability, family status, marital status, age, human, I can't say that word, virus, infection, virus inclusion, any of the above classes through various methods, including but not limited to personal meetings, open houses, showing, social media posts, cover letters, photographs, and whatever documentation.
So long. Okay. Gonna read S6, 5.
Electronic, or digital, or fax signatures. Electronically executed copies of this purchase contract and any related documents shall be fully binding and effective for all purposes, whether or not originally executed documents are transmitted to escrow. Electronic signatures on documents will be treated the same as original signatures. However, each party agrees to promptly forward original executed documents to escrow if requested. The parties understand that conveyance, mortgage, and other recordable documents must be executed, acknowledged, and delivered in original form and will not be acceptable if signed only electronically.
So those last documents, conveyance, mortgage, other recordable, that's typically done at signing, right? When you're in front of the escrow officer or the lender. I'll read S6 counterparts. This purchase contract and any addenda amendments and related documents may be executed in any number of counterparts and by different parties in separate counterparts. Each of these, when so signed, shall be deemed to be an original, and all which taken together shall constitute one and the same document. This shall be binding upon all of the parties, notwithstanding that all of the parties do not sign the original or same counterpart. So you know how you guys all know how that works. So buyer can sign one copy, seller can sign a different copy and combine it's executed, right? Or you have multiple parties selling. And so you can technically send them all out, let's say it's 5 parties, they each sign independently and then combined, once they all sign, then it's done, right? Complete agreement. The purchase contract constitutes the entire agreement between buyer and seller and supersedes and cancels any and all prior negotiations, representations, warranties, and understandings or agreements, both written and oral, of buyer and seller. No variation or amendment of this purchase contract shall be valid or enforceable unless in writing and signed by both buyer and seller. So your point about if you want to extend J1, get it in writing, right? All agreements and representations about the property must be set forth in writing, and all parties agree that to be effective, any representation or warranty must be made by a brokerage firm or any party to this purchase contract must be set forth in writing in this purchase contract or an amendment to this purchase contract or in any required disclosure statement. Buyer and seller shall each hold harmless and release the brokerage firms from any claims based upon any alleged representation which is not set forth in writing as stated in this paragraph. Okay,
So on the, I want to go back to counterparts. That's why I said that everything should be timestamped. Because someone will question what time you sign a document if they've got another offer in hand that they want to get accepted.
it really comes into play. Let's say that it's competitive. And so I'm the seller. Offer comes in. Seller signs and accepts the offer that came in for $1 million on this property. No, I take that back. Seller counters the offer, $1 million back to buyer. Buyer takes buyer's time and doesn't submit or doesn't sign, even though they said they're going to sign it. They didn't send it back right away. In the meantime, seller receives another offer at 1.1 million. So at that point, seller can rescind the counter offer and then move on to the next offer that came in at 1.1 million. So that's where the time stamp would be very important to demonstrate that counter was submitted, no response was given, and the timestamp of the rescission was sent over to buyer. And then
Don't they have to wait for the first one for whenever that expiration date is?
Nope.
Oh, they don't.
You can
Nope.
rescind.
You rescind it. You can rescind it.
Rescind it first.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Otherwise, you're gonna have to accept it offers.
Right.
We're talking about that.
Yeah.
Well, that had to do with a backup offer. Where they released it, you know,
Yeah. So
same thing.
that's another thing that I caution buyers about. I say that, if we submit an offer, seller doesn't sign, but seller counters. I impress upon buyer that for some reason, if seller changes their mind, they can rescind. So please sign right away and send it back.
Do they have to have a reason, or they can just change it?
They
You can
just change your mind.
You can change their mind to an escrow.
Yeah.
Right.
So, those little things that you can position with your client will help you, right? Because then you're not waiting for them. And then if seller decides to rescind, and you've already warned them at that point, they knew that they took their time. So don't blame you. And we've done that before. We rescinded counters. Buyer's not happy when that happens, but oh well.
And lastly, section T is if you're representing the seller and you're going to go ahead and counter the offer, make sure they check T2 and they initial it so that when you send it back over with the counter offer, that the buyers know that it's a counter offer and don't try and finagle and just sign at the bottom like, hey, it's accepted because you didn't say it was countered
Oh, the
in T2.
seller or buyer thinks it's
The buyer.
Oh,
Well, because otherwise, if I get this and I just accept it, you can send me a counter, but it doesn't say you're countering me in the offer, right? Because as the seller, I'm gonna have him sign the fully, I'm
whole
gonna have
thing.
him fully execute the purchase contract as well as the counter offer.
Yeah.
So if I forget to have him initial and check off counter offer and he signs everything, it goes over to the other side.
oh, without checking the box.
Without checking the
Oh,
box.
yeah.
Yeah.
What is the initial?
I just have them initial and date it, right? Electronically,
Next to the box.
next to the box,
Oh, so.
Yeah, that'll be a big problem if you sent it over unchecked.
right?
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
Just the
Initial
initial.
log like that?
I can't see it.
You just have lines to the side.
No, I just, like an X inside the box.
So the X initial date instead of box.
No,
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 not
no,
in the-
no, no.
Check the
just-
box.
Yeah, just check the box, exit, and then just have them initial and date it. Where the X, so they can't, then nobody can say like, oh, you wrote that in later,
I got it. Yeah.
right? Or they try and wipe the whole thing out. I'm telling you, there's really some unscrupulous agents out there, so I just, and
Wow,
they
white it out? Oh my God. Wow. Okay. Yeah,
like the X in the,
exactly.
the X in the box. Yeah, I've seen that, yeah. Early on, they're like, if you're in the business long enough, you're gonna see some stuff, and that's why, like, I have my old business partner that we're in business with. He's like, hey man, I got an offer today on my listing. I'm like, who's it from? He'll say the name, and I go, oh shit, not from them, right? And sometimes I'm serious, and sometimes I'm joking, but he gets all riled up.
Especially if that's the only offer.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, I mean, the worst nightmare is to be in a transaction with someone on the other side that's just horrible to deal with.
Okay, how do you want to handle the addendums? What time is it now? We have an hour. Wow,
Oh,
cool.
do you guys want to go through all of these?
We need one, but
Or we should, yeah, go get more
Right there,
food.
get
Go
more
for it.
food.
Go for it. We should selectively go through certain ones.
Well, I would say that the standard addendum, which is, I believe, the third one.
Yep.
That should be accompanying all contracts. And the reason being, it really is a disclosure statement of buyer beware. That you should, building permits disclosure, property description, obtain a professional property inspection. That KW may represent more than one buyer or more than one seller. And it talks about, short-term rentals.
What are the other addendums? Do
Um,
you have it?
which what?
Going for better homes and all that?
Oh, it's right here. Yeah. Oh, you want to go over these? You want to
No,
go our
no,
addendum?
no. You can go. You want to, are we gonna read them or what do you want to do?
No, I don't think we're gonna read the whole thing. Yeah, all right, let's do the first one, cesspool and septic. If you're selling something up in the country, more than likely you're not connected to the sewer system. And you just need to just add this addendum in there because you want the sellers to disclose what exactly do they have. Because I think it's like 2035. All cesspools have to be replaced.
wait, what's the country in Hawaii?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I would say you got parts of like the west side of Waianae, Nanakuli, past Kaneohe. I want to say anything from Kaneohe to probably like Haleiwa, Wailua, parts of Wahiawa. Some old subdivisions over there. They may all be on, way back in the Valley of Kalihi. Probably not so much anymore, but there was a time where they didn't have any sewers that went all the way back, way back in the valley. So I think most of those people are now on sewer, but maybe a few that are on septic or cesspool. Some developments that say that were built when the infrastructure wasn't really in place for that much sewer capacity. Then they had developers put in time septic tanks where the septic tanks would pump into the sewer system between like 11 o'clock at night to 4 o'clock in the morning.
How old do you think those are?
Those we represented a developer maybe about 15 years ago. And he had 7 brand new homes, and that's how they were set up because that was the only way he was going to get a building permit. And it was in an area that had all newer homes, but because the sewer was at capacity, that's the only way he could develop it. You got parts of Aleva. I don't know how many of you drive up and down Tailing Street, but I've got a client that I don't represent him. He bought a CPR lot and he waited too long to get his approvals and they shut him down they're saying that unless you have, if you're on a CPR, you cannot hook up into the sewer system indefinitely. Because they're tearing up all of Hoff Tailing, and once that's done, they're gonna work all the way up to 11 Heights. So be very, very careful installing a CPR in areas like that.
You said 2035.
It's a 2035. The date kind of keeps changing a little bit.
But that's out there.
Yeah, there's parts of Makiki Heights. You got one side of the street is on sewer system, the other side, they're on septic tanks or even cesspool. And the further you go up, they're all on septic and or cesspool.
I can cover the standard. What is that? What is that?
This agency disclosure addendum, I probably wouldn't use that. Because we have some new forms that we came out with. But can you go to
Yeah, so the standard, this is pretty fair in terms of a standard addendum. And I have some examples of others that I'll pass around after. But when you go through this, you want to explain to your client. So just letting them know that verify everything in J1. Letting them know that not all properties have proper building permits. And if they're not properly permitted, they could be fined, they could be forced to remove it. Buyer can bring in a contractor to review everything. Recommend that you get a professional inspection. Recommend you get a termite inspection. On the second page, short-term rental disclosure. So it's pretty fair and it's just straightforward, right? What it doesn't do is it doesn't change the purchase contract. Okay. Now, in contrast to our standard addendum, we have these other addendums like Better Homes and Gardens. And we're not picking on these guys, but it's just that it's different. Locations. I think even Coastal Banker may have one that changes it. So I'll give you an example, right? So for locations, this is their standard addendums. On the back, there's a section that if you don't read it, they can check a box. And let's say that you're the seller. It requires a seller then to provide buyer with a building permits package. Right, so they're coming in as a buyer, they check it off, you didn't notice that. And then later they ask you, hey, when are you gonna order the building permits package? And you're seller, right? And you say, no, if you want it, you go buy it. Oh, you didn't notice that it's on our addendum that we signed off on? It changed the contract. Another section is for Better Homes as an example. So if I find evidence of termites based on the main contract, so the inspector goes in and finds evidence of live infestation. Can I cancel the contract as a buyer? How? No, we passed J1. So if it's a new disclosure, maybe significant damage, yes, but it wouldn't be the termite provision. With location, with Better Homes, they will say that if they find evidence of live infestation, it gives the buyer time to review it, like 5 days typically, and if they want, they can cancel. When do you do termite? It's a 45-day close. When is termite typically done? 15 days prior to close.
Because
Right.
most lenders won't accept it if it's older than 15 days. So double check with the lender before ordering it.
Yeah, so just know that our standard addendum is pretty straightforward. Doesn't really change anything in the contract. Don't assume that when you work with other brokerage firms, that theirs is the same. It's not. So make sure you read it. Okay.
So then you just sign in and counter them.
I just counter it out, either counter out the entire thing or counter out specifically those provisions that you don't like in the counter. And some, like Better Homes, they will have one addendum for buyer when they represent buyer, and they have a different one when they represent seller.
Did you make copies of those?
No, these are copies. You guys, I'll pass it around, and then you guys can make your own copies. Yeah, and just take a look at that. These are just examples, right? And those are real addendums, so you will see them if you ever work with these companies.
Seller's replacement property, they sold home A and they're buying home B. Make sure you have this because the last thing you want to do is to commit them to the sale of their existing home. And they don't find another home or their home that they found falls through, they're obligated to close. So this one, read it carefully. It states that, is subject to them finding a home within X amount of days. And on the backside, it says if they do find a home, it gives them outs in case something happens where they're not able to close on the replacement property, Kind of sucks for the buyer that they've done all that work on the other side, but you really want to protect your seller.
If you're a new agent working with a buyer or a seller with a replacement property addendum, make sure you talk to somebody more experienced to understand what you're signing up for, or to change it if it doesn't suit your client, because it can get a little tricky. As an example, let's say that as the buyer's agent, you really love this property, but it's subject to the seller finding a replacement. And so as the buyer's agent, you go, great, they accepted our offer. So you go through your whole process, right? Find the home inspector, maybe have a roofing guy come in, maybe scope the sewer line and incur all that expense. And then all of a sudden the seller goes, oh, sorry, cancel, can't find a replacement. I mean, we haven't found anything, so we're gonna cancel. So the buyer looks at you going, you just spent all this money, thinking that seller will find something, but it's possible the seller won't. So there are ways that you can say, we will start our escrow or our inspection process once you notify us that you found the replacement property. Right? So there's ways to mitigate some of that stuff.
Did you guys have rent back? Or you call it something different, or do you even have that?
Oh, you're gonna simultaneously close typically.
But if you need a post occupancy agreement, you can do that too, right?
Because they're not gonna, so typically if there's a replacement property addendum, seller has to sell in order to buy.
Yeah,
Right.
you have to have a simultaneous closing. Doesn't mean they're gonna move out, move in on the same day.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're gonna probably want to do a post occupancy agreement. Yeah, which is a different addendum. Which the board has one in their zip forms. Backup offer addendum. So the most important thing on this one is paragraph 4 says parties agreed that the acceptance date shall be defined as the date seller delivers written notice to buyer's brokerage firm that the primary purchase contract has been canceled or terminated and escrow is in receipt of fully executed agreement. So in the scenario that I explained to you a couple of weeks ago, they didn't have that provision in there. They just went ahead and just sent an email to the buyers and saying, hey, we're canceling you, and the other buyer, hey, we're accepting you. They didn't cancel anything with escrow. It all happened like after hours. So this is a really important document. And so if you're representing a seller and you have a backup offer addendum, do not put the other people in primary position until escrow receives cancellation notices from all parties. Affiliated business arrangement. We have an affiliation with First White Title. So if you're going to name them in your purchase contract, or if you're going to counter them on a seller's counter offer, you have to have the affiliated business disclosure statement. Representation of more than one buyer or seller, I would just go ahead and take that out because it's in the standard addendum. Election to purchase cancel contract. I didn't write it, so I'm not really sure if it's any good.
Should be fine.
Yeah,
So you notice in here, it doesn't have a section that gives the person who's terminating, besides the section and I think the name of the section, why, or besides 01 or 02 or 03, you shouldn't be trying to explain why. Like, you shouldn't be saying, the floor was in poor condition and that's why we want to cancel on J1. You should just say J1 unacceptable. You don't want to give them more than they need.
I know the board, I know that we're on the standard forms committee, we have come up with a new one, so I'm not really sure when it's coming out for release. It should be fairly soon. But it's a little bit more detailed than this. I mean, this one's pretty good, but the other one's a little bit more detailed. Because normally what we do is we'll take forms from other brokerage companies in Hawaii as well as other states. And then we'll go ahead and pick out pieces that we really like and incorporate them into something that we think will work as a whole. And then we argue about it for like 4 months. Okay, next one is seller simultaneous counter offer. Make sure you definitely have this one. If you've got 3 offers that come in a really competitive market, you kind of want to just tell everybody, come back in with your highest and best if they're all within a certain price range. But if you got offers that are 10, 20, 30, $40,000 off the asking price, then just do one counter offer, send it out to everybody at one time. And then if they all come back at the same time, accepted, the seller has 24 hours to decide on which one they really want and cancel the other ones. So he's not obligated to sell the property to 4 different people. Any questions on that one? Vacant land addendum is really, really important. Because there's all kinds of things that's in the land that you don't know about. So I really highly recommend that you add this to your purchase contract. Court confirmation sale addendum, that's important. And keep in mind too, is if you are representing a buyer and it's subject to court confirmation, and you go there with the buyer, and the judge is going to say, is there anybody here that thinks they'll go to confirm the sale, and there could be another buyer in there, and they go and reopen up the bid. And whether it's probate, guardianship, bankruptcy, or whatever, if they reopen up the bid, let me take that back.
It's standard. They always reopen it.
Yeah, they reopen the bid, but you're representing a buyer that's going to bid on the reopen up the bid. Your commissions are like 0.25%. It's not going to be 3%. The person with the original bid will make more money than you do.
Oh, really?
Yes, that happened to
I know
me.
that.
I think I got the MCA that we had was laughing at me, like how much the sale price was and how much the commission was. But yeah, the buyer that had the first position ended up getting more of a commission. So just be aware of that. Lease the fee. Normally lease the fee. If somebody is selling, if one of the big landowners is still selling land, which I don't think they are, they'll have their own purchase contract. Agent or employee purchased for their own account. Want to add that if you're buying your own property. Buyer simultaneous offer addendum. If you're a represented buyer in a hot market, you're submitting 5 offers for 5 different properties. You're going to want to include this because it tells them that they can reject any accepted offer at any time within X amount of hours of expiration of the deadline. Or if you're only doing
So this is good when it's
hot
a
market.
buyer's market.
Mhm.
Not a seller's market.
No, buyer's market.
Yeah, because seller's market, they might say, yeah, we don't need you anyway.
Yeah.
We got multiple offers.
And the same thing with the next one, buyer's offer on another property. I don't know why you just wouldn't use buyer simultaneous offer addendum. I just think that it just discloses that they're submitting a property on another. That they're submitting an offer on another property, as the other one just says, we're submitting offers on other properties.
This one looks like a maybe canceling another transaction. The second one. It's in termination of a transaction involving a prior offer.
Yeah. I'd have to really read it. Thank you, Rolando, for Making me look really bad.
Yeah, whoever put this together, it's not even printed properly.
Non-conforming property. Does everybody know what non-conforming is? Okay, non-conforming would be if you're in a neighborhood. Let's say, Mo'ili, Kali'i, like a really old neighborhood that used to. Where you could build a house that was on, 2,000 square feet of land. And now they changed the zoning where you have to have 5,000 minimum lot size.
Remnants property.
What is that?
So like the developer will have, R5, right? So all 5,000.
Right,
And then there's this small little remnant property that they were allowed to build. on.
okay.
So
So it's not,
you can find that in different neighborhoods.
okay,
Not
excluding remnant property, remnant.
I think that's what the surveyor
All
referred
right,
to.
so if I have a house in Kalihi that is on a 2,000 square foot lot. And now it's zone R5 and I need 5,000 square feet. If that house burns down to the ground. That house may not be able to be rebuilt.
Hmm.
And so it's really important that you check the zoning on it, let the buyer beware.
Or have you guys seen like in older, like Pololo, up in the neighborhood, the residential neighborhood, you'll see like the hobby shop or restaurants, right? Yeah. That's probably, yeah, it's I don't know what the zoning is there, but it's probably this non-conforming. There was a store up in Pu'unui. I don't think
Oh,
it's there
Pu'unui.
anymore. Yeah. But it's a house now, but same thing.
I remember, yeah.
Yeah.
When my clients used to live in Pu'unui, they would tell me all about the store.
Yeah.
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 So,
House that like we didn't, it didn't, it was part of a larger lot that was one family owned it, and then they divided the lot themselves. And then part of the lot was very small, and then they had a little house on it, but you couldn't, because it was part of the other like lot that the original family had, with the other house on it, you couldn't like rebuild or make modifications to the house. So that was crazy, like if you bought.
Were you able to sell it separately?
Yeah, they could sell it separately though.
Oh, that is bizarre.
oh,
Regular house is a lot, like the large house was on a large lot, and then they had divided the corner of the lot. Because it was really large lot, and then they had a little house on that little lot, and they were selling that little lot, and then if you built up, you could make it, really nice, but you couldn't do that apparently.
because it exceeds the floor area ratio for the lot, that's why.
Oh,
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you can put what's there, but you can't. build
Right.
on.
Right.
Wow.
But wouldn't that owner have to CPR the lot? Like, wouldn't that have to be legally separated?
Yeah, so they had gotten their own PMK,
Right,
but
okay.
it was weird because it was.
Either CPR or subdivided. Had to be something in order to sell it.
But it was a small portion. It ended up, they took back a TMK or something like that, like they had given it in one document, and then they said, no, wait, this is.
With the
part of
government.
other." Yeah. It was crazy. It
So
was
cash only
crazy.
buyers?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
I don't think a lender would let that one.
Or non-conforming could be like it's a 7-bedroom house, but tax records only has like for 3 bedrooms, you probably want to use a non-conforming addendum.
So, yeah, let's say that they enclosed or they have the basement, right? Because some of the old neighborhoods would have what's classified as a finished basement. And not living area. But they converted it into living area. And they put in a shower, because I had one like that up on Pacific Heights.
That's non-conforming.
Yeah, so what we did was, they were on the market for a while. And so I wrote into the contract that seller had to get all permits approved before closing. They signed off. And the seller, he's an attorney. He didn't realize what he signed off. He was pissed. Took them 12 months. We got it all properly permitted. Just be careful.
talking about timelines, I'm going way, way back. There was I wrote a contract on a property that was for sale by owner. And he gave me a counter offer with no expiration date. We came back 2 weeks later and accepted it.
You see all kinds, right?
Yeah, yeah. So it's a pretty interesting business and there's a lot of stories out there.
Yeah, the challenge is we've gone through so much, right? And for those of you that have just started, it's overwhelming. Because it's just words on paper. Until you have your reps, it's hard to really apply what we talk about in the class here. So thanks for sticking in there, because when you first come and you go through this, you're like, gosh, how am I gonna remember all this stuff? But then as you get experienced, then I think it shows up again where, okay, now I understand what they're talking about in more detail, because now I can apply it now that I have the chance to get into escrow.
And
So-
every day is different.
Different.
And I've got a property in escrow that the seller passed away, had 3 heirs. They went to court. One of the heirs went to court. He became the personal representative to sell the property. We had it in the market in 2021, couldn't get the brother out that was living there. Take it off the market. So now the brother since passes away. So now we're on the market. He's got another brother who's now incapacitated, and Chris Diaz is representing him because he can't make a decision for himself. So now the guy,
Court appointed conservative.
yeah, conservator. And now they're saying that they may have to open up probate for the brother that just passed
Passed
away. So I may not be able to sell it for like another 5 months. Even though that the one brother was appointed by the court to sign off on the property.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of things that happen.
On a positive note, I will say that large majority of agents, even agents with experience, have not read this contract. And you guys have, so you have a leg up on them. Because a lot of guys will just go based on what other people have told them, or they'll just read a little bit and they assume they know it. I've seen where experienced agents are telling me something that is contrary to the contract, and I have to point it out to them. Right? And it's like, well, why don't you know that? But as Tony points out, there's all kinds out there. So I commend you guys for sitting through 5 of these classes, because it's pretty tedious, right, to go through this. So good job.
So we're gonna put together, I talked about maybe sticking around and doing a purchase contract, but forget about that. So just feel free to eat and then leave. But Kent and I were talking about another class, maybe like 2 days, where we'll have a purchase contract and we'll divide the room in 2. People represent buyers, people represent sellers, and we'll throw all kinds of scenarios in there, and you guys have to kind of negotiate and figure things out.
You guys want to do that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
so how much,
no, not next Tuesday. Ken will be here.
yeah, so what are you thinking, like, when you say 2 days, like a couple of hours
I think like a couple of hours.
per day and 2 days?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So I think what we'll do is we'll probably send out, when you first sign up for the classes, do you have to give them your email address in order to attend? Okay, so they have the email address of everybody that's here.
Yeah.
What was that?
$25 if you don't show up.
That I don't know.
Oh, that goes to Chad? Oh, that's for his class.
See, you show up, we give you lunch.
Wow, what a
Um,
difference.
Will there be lunch next time?
Great.
Yeah, I think if you're all signed, if the office has your email, if Tyler has your email address, if not, stop by and see Tyler. Give me email address, and what we'll do is I'll do like a Kent and I will pick a property from MLS, and then we'll go ahead and shoot it over to everyone and just do a contract for it. And then I think before class, we'll probably have you submit it to Kent and I. And we'll take a couple of them, and maybe one, we'll narrow it down, we'll just counter it. And then everybody just, somebody's representing the seller, somebody's representing the buyer, one side. And you guys, everybody can kind of converse, like, wait, Biden get his loan today and it's due, what do you do? You know? Or is the seller decides that I want to sell, what do you do then? Yeah,
So if we were to ask you guys how to improve on this class, any recommendations? On what we should change? If we were to do it again, or add that into this class? Okay, I'm more of a hands-on guy.
Yeah, so just reading it kind of just.
Yeah.
well, that's why like the second class would be important, right? But the first class, because then otherwise, then you're committed for, or we're committed for like maybe 7 classes in a row, same as you, right? But if you have some time to go back and take a look at this, like a week or two, and there's like 2 classes off a little bit at a later date, it's a little bit easier to retain the information. But if we just started next week and, you know, you haven't filled out a purchase contract in between, like we can tell you what dates work good, right? As far as the number of days for certain provisions, but unless you actually sit down and do it, and then we start getting to role playing, you know, who's representing buyer, who's representing the seller, then you're not really gonna know that if this number of days work that I put down in my purchase contract compared to what we think it should be. And what you write in the purchase contract will vary depending on who your buyer or seller are, you know? But there are provisions that you can just shorten down the timeframes. That makes it it makes it better for both parties.
Any other suggestions?
That part 2 would be great, actually, right?
Okay. All right.
I think it is a great.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It was great,
you're welcome.
especially because we have to explain this to our client.
Yeah.
So I've glossed over in the blur of whatever, and I'm trying to work myself through it. It's super important. I would feel so vulnerable. not being
Yeah.
able
So-
to-
If I had one suggestion for the new agents, I would pair up. Or just find somebody that you can talk to. And go through the contract. You need to explain to them in layman's terms. Because once you can do that. You'll learn a lot more, right? It's like teaching a class. You can understand the material if you're a student, but to teach it, you gotta know it that much more. So same thing, right? I can read it, I understand it, but trying to explain it out to somebody, point by point.
And they want to know, well, how can I get out? What happens if this happens? Where's my
Yeah.
out? Where's my this?
Yeah.
So you have to really
Yes,
know the nuances to say, oh, right here, now let's read through that.
so I would strongly recommend that. Go find somebody that you can present the contract to. So you first go through it, write your notes down. And find somebody that you can present the contract to. That should be homework.
We don't give homework.
I know, but-
And then and it's important to read the contract all the time because, you know, like Ken had an old version. And he asked somebody to read,
It was a fair housing. It's
yeah,
not on the old contract.
that wasn't in the old
And that
contract.
old
So,
contract is only like, I don't know.
yeah, so it changes all the
Couple years.
time. And I know we're working on a new version too.
So
So-
we can expect pretty much annual updates to all docs. And it's all fluctuating different times a year. It's not like they're trying to do it, you know, beginning of the calendar year. It could just transition at any time.
You know,
Don't they come up with 2 versions every year?
I'll know a little bit more at the next committee meeting and I'll pose that question because I'm not really sure how they do it. But I know that they do have some deadlines and they really try and push some documents through a little bit quicker than some of the other ones. Like I know the sales real property disclosure, that one took about 3 years to do. And there's a subcommittee for the purchase contract. And I think we're like I think we're in L or even I for disclosures. So we've got a long way to go. And we've been working on that since like 2021.
Why does it take so long?
Because it's like a total, because people can't
agree?
They can't agree. That's the problem. Okay, well, I'm gonna get something to eat.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.